Thanks everyone for being here. So I realized it's a Thursday and it's 3 p.m. So Gabor told us that the presentation should be one that entertains us. I'll try to be as entertaining as possible. So this talk is about variance reduction techniques and stochastic optimization. Okay? So it's really joint work with many, many people.
Are you sure it's Thursday today?
The third day.
I see.
I was wondering if someone would pick up on my plan. So Pierre-Antoine Mozagal, who is here, who's now at Google Brain, Robert Gower, who's now a professor at Telecom, Reza Babanezad, who's finishing his PhD at UBC, and Mark Schmidt from UBC, Francis Bach from INRIA, Andrew Fitzgibbon from Microsoft Research, and Yashua from UNAM. Okay? So really, this is just to make sure that everyone is on the same page. When we talk about optimization, we want to minimize some function f. That depends on a set of parameters, theta, which are basically usually d real numbers. And so there's the standard setting, which is the batch setting. Sometimes we don't, f is really written as an expectation over a distribution, and so that's really the stochastic setting, and we only have access to samples from that distribution. And if there's some kind of in-between, where basically f is the sum of n function, n being fixed, and so that typically in empirical risk minimization, that's what we have. And so here we can choose when we're in that setting whether or not we consider this as that function or as more the stochastic setting. And some assumptions may apply during the talk. Sometimes we'll have convexity, smoothness, both. So really, I'm going to focus on stochastic methods. Okay. And you really have two major hurdles when you try to have a stochastic optimization problem. One is ill conditioning. That means that if you think of a quadratic problem, so you have the Hessian, and maybe the largest eigenvalue of the Hessian is much, much bigger than the smallest eigenvalue of the Hessian. Okay? And if we have ill conditioning, we know that batch methods tend to be extremely slow. And then there's another issue that does not appear in batch methods, that only appears in stochastic methods. That's gradient noise. Okay? Obviously, since you don't have access to the true function, but only to samples of that function, there's some inherent noise with this, and how do you deal with that noise determines how quickly you converge to the minimum of the function. For some reason, maybe I missed some of it, in the optimization literature, almost everyone focuses on the ill conditioning. It might be for historical reasons, because it used to be that most optimization was in the batch setting, but you're going to have a lot of papers that try to improve the conditioning of the problem with some approximations of the Hessian, for instance, but you really have very few papers that try to appropriately deal with gradient noise. Okay, so really that's what I'm going to talk about today. And so if you look, for instance, at the very nice book by Sébastien from a couple of years ago, on the section of stochastic optimization, we say, well, you assume there's some noise with some standard deviation sigma, and it's just there. As if there's nothing we can do about it. Now, here are the convergence we can get with that noise, but there's really no section on how can we reduce that noise. Whereas whenever you have something about the ill conditioning, there's how can we improve that condition. Okay. If you look at, there was another paper by Léon Boutou, Frank Curtis, and Jorge Naceda on the review optimization techniques in machine learning. And there are basically three ways to deal with noise. One is increasing the batch size, which works but is computationally expensive. The second one is what we call variance reduction methods. I'm going to talk about them, but they only apply in the ERM setting when you have a finite number of data points. And the third one is iterative averaging. Okay, so iterative averaging is pretty old. It works really, really well. It's not clear to me how iterative averaging could be applied to non-convex settings. And even though most of the optimization literature has proofs in the convex setting, it turns out that these methods are usually also used in the non-convex settings, even though we might not have proof for it. But so you still want to have a method that doesn't blatantly fail in a non-convex setting. And iterative averaging, I can design some simple cases where you see that it would not work. So it works really well in convex setting. I'm not a big fan of this method in general. Okay? So can we improve gradient noise and reduce that noise to improve the convergence speed of stochastic methods? So the rationale behind variance reduction, and it really echoes what Sham was saying on Monday, the first day of the workshop, which is that in stochastic gradients, usually we discard a lot of valuable information. Okay? If you think about it, you compute these gradients, which might be expensive if you have a deep model. You make a tiny step, and then you completely forget about that gradient forever. Okay? And that seems incredibly wasteful. And so somehow we could gather all the information we've computed so far and reuse that information. Surely it must be more efficient. Okay? And so my view of variance reduction is how can we most efficiently use all the computations we've done since the beginning of the optimization to reach fast convergence. So this workshop has been mostly on the theoretical side. And on Monday I was talking with Gege, who was talking about people who prove things with their hands. So I decided to do a plot of the level of hand waviness during my talk. So it's going to start really, really high. That is, I'm going to show stuff for which I have absolutely no proof. And it's really an intuition. And my hope with this talk is not to show you all the results that exist, is to present a topic that interests me and for which I think there's many theoretical results to be had that I don't have yet. And so I'm not going to claim many things. I'm just going to tell you what I think is true, even though I have no proof, in the hope that you're going to be excited enough that you want to prove some of these things. So just please don't dismiss everything that has no proof, otherwise this talk is going to be 3 minutes long. But just take it as an indication of what directions could be interesting to pursue. Okay? And there's a dip here with it was my work with Francis, so we actually have it. Okay. So the first idea is some kind of probabilistic interpretation of what we try to do in optimization, okay, and how we can merge all the information we acquire. So the thing is, you have your true function f that you're trying to minimize. That is an expectation. And you only have access to samples, so f of theta for a given x time, and I'm going to build fi of theta. And so your true gradients is also an expectation, but then you have samples. And so if you have the true gradients, that's what you want to use, because that would be batch gradients, which tend to be really fast in terms of the number of iterations. So really, can you estimate what the true gradient is from these noisy samples? And that's what we're doing all the time. So let's see. What we can do is we can define a model of how my some noisy gradients occur and try to estimate the true gradient. And what do we do when we design a model? We, of course, start by designing a Gaussian model. So I'm going to have a likelihood parameter given my true gradients. So really the expectation of my gradient over the samples. I'm assuming that whenever I draw data point and compute this gradient, it's going to be Gaussianly distributed around the true gradient with some covariance. Okay? So it's really this idea that when you try to minimize a function with noisy gradients, you don't have access to the true gradients, some slight variation around that true gradient. And here I'm just saying this slight variation is going to be modeled as a Gaussian. Again, red flag. I have absolutely no proof that is indeed Gaussian. That's really, again, that's a mere idea. Think of it this way. So now you have your prior function, that is what my true gradient is. And at first you don't really know. So I'm going to choose an isotropic prior on what my true gradient is. And when you do that, what you end up with is that you have a posterior distribution on the true gradients given your noisy gradients. And there's a funny thing appearing, which is that the true gradient given your noisy gradients, let's say there should be a product here, has an expectation which is not the noisy gradient. It's a slightly modified version of the noisy gradient. And there's this interesting quantity here that appears C, which is the covariance matrix of the gradients. Okay? So what does that mean? It means that, let's assume you know that your gradients have a lot of noise in a certain direction. Really, you don't want to believe that direction, because it might be completely wrong. Whereas if there's another direction in which all of your noisy gradients agree, then you're pretty confident that the true gradient in that direction is correct. Okay? So what you want to do with this estimate, you have a -1 term. So, okay, so without this, you just do stochastic gradient descent. But here what you say is I want to shrink my estimates of the gradients in directions when I have a large covariance. Okay? So if there's some directions in which there's a lot of noise, I don't trust these directions. So think of it this way. You're looking for your way in Montreal, you don't know where to go, you ask 10 people, all 10 people tell you to go north, but then maybe 7 people tell you to go west, and 3 people tell you to go east. It's like, you want to say, they all agree I should go north, they're not really sure if I should go west or east, so I'm just going to go north, make a move in that direction, and then I'm going to ask again. And maybe they're going to be more confident. And what that protects you against is that if there's only one gradient that tells you to go east for 10 kilometers, you're really not going to trust that gradient. Whereas in standard stochastic gradient fashion, you'd actually move 10 kilometers and then ask again and maybe come back. Okay? So it really prevents you from doing all these hasty decisions.
But you need a covariance.
Yes. So in this work, the covariance is actually fairly easy to estimate. What you can do, the covariance, just like the Hessian empirically, is a quantity that doesn't move very quickly during optimization. And so you can use a moving average of the covariance matrix. And what we'll see is that that was 10, 12 years ago, because the neural network was one hidden layer fully connected. What you can see is that the covariance matrix of the gradients actually has almost a block diagonal structure. And so the blocks are all the parameters connecting one layer to a neuron of the layer above. Okay? So it's really fun. And it kind of reminded me when Peter on Monday talked about the fact that non-convexity was within a layer and not in between 2 consecutive layers. Here, all the structure is almost within each layer. Okay? So it's not exactly block diagonal, but it's really very close. I mean, it's almost 0 terms outside of the layer. So in that work, what we did actually is we maintained, instead of maintaining the low rank approximation of the covariance, we actually maintained a low rank approximation of each block, which allowed us to have fairly high rank approximation of the full covariance without too much work. Okay. And it turns out that it works pretty well. So that's the green one versus stochastic gradients with different batch sizes. And on the x-axis, you have really the CPU time in seconds. So we have some extra computational costs due to estimating the covariance, inverting that quantity, but it's still offset by the gain in the number of iterations you make. And that's on one data set, and I think that goes on the USPS.
So the name of this thing is Stop Movement?
Yes, I was young. We needed a T to make Conga. And so we had online natural gradients algorithm. And so like, what starts with a T? It almost ended up being Comintern with Conga, but we decided for cooking this. Anyway, yes. I probably wouldn't call that paper this right now. Okay. So what was interesting is that taking uncertainty into account speeds up training. And one of the first, one of the most the comment I had the most time at that time was, well, it's because the covariance is an approximation of the Hessian. And so fundamentally, without ever saying it, yes.
So yeah, maybe you're going to talk about that, but do you have further insights for the connection with natural gradients?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the next one. So, interestingly, people told me, well, we know that the covariance matrix is just an approximation to the Hessian, so what you're doing is an approximation to Newton method. You just use this weird justification for it, but fundamentally, it's Newton. And so now the question was, is this really, the gains, are they just really because the covariance is an approximation to the Hessian, and if they're not, can we actually combine the information from the two? And intuitively, they're really not the same thing at all. The Hessian, it's really, how does the gradient change when I move a bit in parameter space? Okay? So it accounts for changes in parameter space, and any twice differentiable function has a Hessian. You don't need this sum structure for a Hessian. Well, covariance tells you, if I slightly change my inputs, how will my gradient change? Okay? So you need data points to have covariance. So they really do not encode the same thing. So why the confusion? Well, the confusion comes from the Fisher information metric used in natural gradients. Okay? So here's the difference. You take the outer products of the gradients. Now, if you take this integral under the true distribution, like the data distribution of y given x, that gives you the covariance matrix of the gradients. If you take this integral under the model distribution of y given x, that becomes the Fisher information matrix. Okay? This seems like a very small change. And in fact, if your model is well specified, at the optimum, these two quantities are the same, these two matrices are the same. That's one justification. But in practice, they really have no reason to be the same, and I'm going to give you the simplest example I can think of would have nothing to do with each other. You assume that your model, so now we have no y, you have a model of x given theta, which is a Gaussian centered theta, with the identity covariance. Okay, it's very simple. And now you try, so you have access to x's, and you try to estimate theta. Okay? So notice maximum likelihood estimate is the mean of the x's. And so if you do log likelihood, then the function you're trying to minimize is the square loss between theta and x. Its derivative with respect to theta is theta minus x, and I can compute the outer products. Now, what do these two matrices C and F look like? Does everyone know? F should be known, C not necessarily. Okay? So it turns out that the covariance matrix of the gradient is the covariance matrix of the samples. The Fisher information is the identity. So the Fisher information matrix is exactly equal to the Hessian. We have what we're used to, that is, natural gradient is a way of handling curvature, and we have F equals 1. The covariance matrix of the gradient has nothing to do with that. And it can really change one without changing the other. Okay? So again, here, this is an algebraic proof, but they do not encode the same kind of information. And we have, I'm not going to talk about this because as Nicolas noticed, I only have 64 slides. But there's been a few papers recently about the link between optimization and generalization. And one talks about wide minima and flat minima and tries to relate the eigenspectrum of the Hessian to generalization. Generalization is really, how does my training set look like my test set? And so there's really this notion of disagreement between the training points. And so it's not related to the Hessian. It must be related to the covariance of the gradients. So the fact that the two formulas are similar really does not mean that they encode the same information. Yes?
Can you remind what's PD and PM?
That's the true distribution. Well, you can call that the data distribution. And that's your model distribution. So when you compute the Fisher information, you actually have to integrate under y sample from your model. Whereas here, you're just going to take yi from your data set. Yes?
Here, so y is some response?
Yes. Well, here, x is what I'm, here, there, I'm sorry, sometimes I put a y, sometimes I don't. In my example, there's no y. I'm trying to model the x. So I have a model of what the x's should be, and I'm trying to find the parameters of my model, which are just the mean of my Gaussian. And my model is obviously incorrect, because the true x's are not necessarily drawn from Gaussian with identity covariance matrix. So if my model is correct, and the covariance of if the x's are truly drawn from Gaussian with identity covariance matrix, this becomes the identity, the two matrices become equal. And then you can actually have some funny thing. If here, instead of I, you put the true covariance matrix of the gradients, so if you say, my model, I know the true covariance matrix, I'm just trying to estimate the mean, then these two matrices will end up being equal. So really, covariance and Hessian are not the same thing, except in one very specific cases. And when I say this, it's usually obvious, except people keep confusing the two, and they just assume that using the covariance helps with curvature. But I think really there's something fundamentally different. Please interrupt me as much as you want. That's the idea. So, one question, what do Adagrad and Adam really do? These are super popular algorithms in optimization, and they justify themselves by talking about curvature. I tried these algorithms on a problem where there was no noise, so in the batch case with high curvature, they really don't perform well. So maybe it's not that much curvature, that they also help with gradient noise without ever mentioning it's an interface. Okay, so as said, if C and H are not the same thing, maybe we should be able to combine them. So when we use Newton method, well, we use Newton method when we have a quadratic function, so I'm going to assume a quadratic function with the Hessian. Now my prime knowledge is still going to be the same, but I'm actually not going to assume isotropic prior on the gradients, I'm going to assume isotropic prior on where I start compared to where the optimum is. Likelihood is the same, and then the posterior distribution, that's the one I had before, and now you basically have a bunch of h minus 1 when you try to do that. That's really not easy to parse, so there's a much easier way to parse it, which is for each individual gradient, I'm going to compute its transformation by h minus 1. And I'm going to compute the mean of these resulting what I call Newton directions, and the covariance of these Newton directions, and now I have exactly Tonga on the Newton directions. Which means that when you want to combine noise reduction with conditioning improvement, what you do is you take all of the individual gradients, you multiply them by h minus 1, that helps with curvature, and now you say, well, these actually were my gradients, now I'm going to apply noise reduction on these. So it's really a two-stage process, and you can pick any algorithm for each of these two that you want. Okay? It's super simple. So just like a Newton method can be seen as first-order gradient descent in a linearly reparameterized space, combining the two is just natural gradient in a linearly reparameterized space. So I'm responsible. I should not use natural gradient. Natural gradient actually uses the Fisher information matrix. It does not use the covariance matrix of the gradients. And I think we also, that's a bit of an overstatement because our paper is really not very known. But had it been known, we would have been responsible for some of the confusion between the two. So the covariance matrix of the gradients, some people call that the empirical Fisher matrix. But again, I think it's in the slower because it has nothing to do with the Fisher information. So we tried this on a bunch of data sets, and for some weird reasons, so in red you have stochastic gradients, in green you have Tonga, in black you have SGDQN, which is a method by Antoine Borde and Léon Boutou, which is some segment order approximation, and on blue you have our method that combines the two. And sometimes you really gain something by combining the two, in some other times you don't see anything at all. There's something I quite like here especially, is that you see that every once in a while there's a big bump for stochastic gradients, but when you actually use the covariance with the green and the blue curve, the bumps are much, much smaller. And that's exactly what I was telling you. When there's a gradient that tells you to move 10 kilometers to the right, if that was in the direction of high covariance, you're actually not going to move that much. So if you have no mechanism to prevent you from doing that, you're going to have a large bump that you have to recover from. But if you account for that early on, you actually don't move that much. So you have much more bumps. So the result is this, that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And to me, it's still a mystery. Again, this whole relationship between C and H, sometimes they're different, sometimes they're similar. Yes?
So that was for one quadratic form, fixed. H was fixed all along.
So the theory, quote unquote, assumed that H was fixed on another. This is on an actual real data, the alpha data sets where we have no idea of the Hessian. This was not a quadratic function.
So then you evaluate the Hessian at every step.
So here, so what we did is, as I said here, you actually use an algorithm to rescale by h minus 1, and then you take these as your gradients, and then you apply Tonga. And so for this algorithm, we use SGDQN, which does a diagonal approximation of the Hessian at every step.
It's pretty big.
It's diagonal. So it's not, but on the other hand, it doesn't do a very good job. So there's another, I think, interesting research direction, which is not going to mention here, is that all the methods, almost all the methods that try to explicitly model the Hessian, because when you have many parameters, they're bound to use a diagonal approximation of the Hessian. And we have absolutely no idea if this is a reasonable approximation. So there's a problem. Yep?
And for example, did you try to analyze these results that you look at how well the diagonal estimate behaves, and then you could explain what you saw in the previous study?
Yeah, so one thing we could do is how good is this Hessian approximation? What we could also look at is numerically how different is the covariance from the Hessian. Because ultimately, especially for over-parameterized models, the true P of y given x and the model P of y given x are probably going to be very similar. So the true matrices are probably going to be the same. Also, this probabilistic interpretation with Gaussians everywhere is extremely small. So my goal is that I use this probabilistic interpretation to give some intuition, but I think fundamentally the fact that the entire optimization literature did away with probabilities, I think we could probably find a similar reasoning without resorting to probabilities at all. Because this is just, I mean, I'm really trying to shoehorn some stuff that probably don't need to be. But I'm going to continue for a bit with probabilities, and then I'll go to the dip in my K waviness and go for actual proven ideas. Any more questions? So there's one, amongst many, there's one issue in this work, which is we reset our knowledge at every step. Every time to get my formula, I said, oh, we have a prior knowledge on the true gradient, which is isotropic centered at 0. It makes no sense, because I compute a noisy gradient, I move, I still have information about my true gradients. Okay, so, and early on, I said, one way to do variance reduction is just to use all the information we acquired since the beginning of the optimization, and so we should use this information. Now, let's assume that you have a fixed Hessian, and you know the Hessian. Okay? Now, if you have a fixed known Hessian, and you compute the gradients at some position in parameter space, you can know the same gradients at every other position in the parameter space. Okay? You just add the Hessian times its place in the parameters. So if I knew, let's assume now that we do the same thing again. We have our prior, which is an isotropic Gaussian. We assume the same likelihood model. We draw stochastic gradients, and so that gives us a posterior distribution. And now we move in parameters. So we do a small move delta 0. If we had our posterior distribution on the gradient at theta 0 was this. If we had a fixed known Hessian, we could exactly change that posterior distribution in theta 0 and know the true gradient at theta 1. You just take this and you take a Hessian times how much you move. Okay? If you know what the gradient is at some point, and you know the Hessian, you know what the gradient is at some other point. That's exactly what the Hessian tells you. Okay? So the only reason we don't have that is that we don't know what the Hessian is, and it's probably not constant. So what we actually have is usually a bound on the Hessian. Let's say it's convex, so you know that the Hessian is positive definite, and the gradients are L Lipschitz, so your Hessian is less than L times the density. And so, since you have uncertainty around the Hessian, it adds variance. If I'm somewhere in my move, I don't really know what the gradient here is, because I don't exactly know what the Hessian is. Okay? And so there's going to be this interesting thing where you move from that, see you have this, where you change your mean, but you also add something to the covariance. It really says moving makes me lose information about what the true gradient is. And how much information I lose depends on how much I move. If I move a lot, I lose a lot of information about what the true gradient is. If I don't move at all, I didn't lose any information about what the true gradient is. Okay? And so there's one result that I want to show. The formula is ugly, but I think it's interesting. It's this one. Because to me, it does exactly what it's supposed to do. So here, I've done a simple thing. I started from a random point, theta 0. I computed stochastic gradient. I moved, and I computed the new stochastic gradient. So now I have two stochastic gradients computed at two different locations. What can I say about my true gradients? Okay? And now I'm going to take two extreme cases. The first one is, I haven't moved at all in between these two stochastic points. So here I haven't lost any information. So if I haven't moved at all, delta 0 equals 0. So this gets removed, this gets removed, and this gets removed. And you see that the mean of your posterior of the true gradient is just the average of the two stochastic gradients you've computed. Which, again, makes perfect sense. If you've computed two stochastic gradients and you haven't moved in between these two, the best estimate you can have of the true gradient is the average of the two gradients you've computed. Now, if on the other hand, I've moved an enormous amount in between the two, then I've lost all the information I had about the first gradient because I moved so much. And here, if you take delta 0 that goes to infinity, what you end up is that mu1 is equal to the second gradient. You've lost all the information about the first gradient. And so what's going to happen naturally when you take this equation is that early on, you're going to move a lot because we know that when you do stochastic gradients, in the early stages of the optimization, you tend to move a lot. And so you're going to forget all the past gradients. It's going to merely be stochastic gradients. But then, as you're going to get closer to the optimum, you're going to start to move less and less, and you're going to start to accumulate information. And so your memory of the past gradients will increase during the optimization. Okay? And that's something I'll talk about in the last part. Momentum has something like this, but every person I know using momentum uses a fixed momentum. What this tells you is that you should use an increasing momentum. You should start with a very low value for momentum, where you basically just do stochastic gradients. And as time goes, you increase the value of momentum, and you keep a longer and longer distance. So it turns out that we tried on a quadratic function with a constant step size, and what you see, that's basically the blue curve. So even with a constant step size, you actually continue decreasing exactly because you have this behavior. Because you accumulate more and more gradients, and so your variance decreases to 0, and so you can still converge with constant step size. Any question on that part? That was the most heavyweighty part. Okay. So all what I presented, as Gerard mentioned, they require knowing the Hessian, they require modeling the Hessian. That's hard to model in high dimensions. Can we do the same thing without ever having to make explicit use of the Hessian? So maybe a quick show of hands. Who's familiar with stochastic variance reduction methods like SAG, SAGA, and DRG? Okay, not that many. So here I'm going to make an assumption, which is we don't actually do the stochastic approximation. We only have a finite number of points. We have endpoints, and we want to find the minimum error on these endpoints. So it's really about the training error. We have, and the finite set is the finite set assumption is extremely important. So that works for the regression, and this is really the strongly convex function. So you can do gradient descent. Okay, so gradient descent, you have iterates where at time step k plus 1, it's time step k minus some step size times your true gradient, and your true gradient is, of course, the sum of all your individual gradients. And so iteration cost is all of the number of data points you have, but you get linear convergence rate. Then you can use stochastic gradients, where instead of computing your true gradients, you basically draw a point at random, and then you apply the gradients for that one particular data point. Then, of course, your iteration cost is much, much smaller because you only draw 1 point. So your iteration cost is constant, but these methods are incredibly slower in terms of number of iterations. Okay? Your convergence actually decreases as O of 1 over k in the strongly convex case. Okay? So you really have to do a trade-off between having fewer iterations but more costly, or more iterations but cheaper. In practice, everyone goes for the latter, and everyone uses stochastic gradient. Well, almost everyone uses stochastic gradient. So this is a cartoon of the error you achieve over time and the log axis. And when you do deterministic, that's in the log scale. When you do deterministic, you have this linear improvement in the log scale. When you do stochastic, you have this improvement. Okay? And the problem is we don't really know when these curves cross. And we would like a method that is as fast as possible as stochastic early on and as fast as deterministic later on. And so there's been a number of methods. So we would like something like this hybrid. There's been a number of methods that got interested in that problem. Some some more stochastic version like stochastic Newton, but it's still all of 1 over k. And you had something I mentioned, momentum, gradients, iterative averaging, but you still had all of 1 over k. You had some other methods that try to improve the rates. You have constant step size. So now it's it's a technique that's used quite a lot, constant step size stochastic gradients. So constant step size converges linearly, which is exactly what you want, like batch size, but not to the minimum, to a ball around the minimum. And so now there's a technique that people use, which is you can use a constant step size converge to a ball, then have your step size converge linearly to a smaller ball and do something like this. But then when to have, we have some theoretical results, but it's not completely obvious. There's another method that people, there's been a few publications on this in the last, let's say, 5 years, which are basically, they start with stochastic, and then they increase the batch size over time to become batch. You can prove things with this, that's nice. The problem then you have the question, how fast do you increase your batch size? And really, that's a point I haven't mentioned yet, but when we design optimization methods, speed is a quality. Ease of use is a major quality. When you have someone trying to use your method, you shouldn't have 4 hyperparameters to tune. There should be 1. And so as soon as you say, I want to increase the batch size, there's a question, how fast do you want to increase the batch size? That's not clear. And so in practice, I'm not sure these methods are really much used. So it turns out that the solution was extremely simple, and that was also a Blyton case of serendipity. We took an existing algorithm from 2007 for which there was no convergence proof. We tweaked something to get a convergence proof, and it turned out that it made the algorithm incredibly faster. And that wasn't the plan at all. So, what is this algorithm? Let's talk about again the full gradient updates. So set your parameter at k plus 1 is your parameter at k minus the average, and you put all your gradients at theta k. Okay? And that was expensive to do. So we're going to change this with something else, which is a memory. So now, it's extremely stupid. You're going to store in memory, for each data point, what is the last gradient you computed for that particular data point. So if I have n data points, I have n boxes in memory. Every time I draw a data point at random, I remove the gradient that was stored in the corresponding box, and I replace it with a new gradient. And now I'm going to take the average of all these stored gradients. So it's a 2-line change in your code. Instead of saying, I'm going to recompute my gradient every time, you say, I compute the average of all, I'm going to replace one stored gradient with the new one for one data point, leaving all the others constant, and I'm going to compute the average of this. Okay? So there's a memory cost, because you have to store all of these gradients, but then you still have a computational cost in the order of 1, because you only can replace one gradient. And the magical thing is that you actually get the linear convergence. So again, in terms of variance reduction, and I said my first slide was, the whole point of variance reduction is to reuse everything you've done before. Stop discarding information that you've computed. And this is exactly what this method does. When it computes a gradient, it keeps it until it computes a new version of that gradient for the exact same data point, which says now I have better information, so I don't need the old one. But as long as I don't have any better information, I'm going to keep this information around. And that's really better than discarding it. Make sense? Yeah. So that's the thing. The paper from 2007 used what they call incremental, where you always draw the data points in the same order. You should not do that. So the worst thing you can do is pick them always in the same order. The best thing you can do is draw them uniformly at random. Almost like the best is you pick them once each, but in different order at every epoch. It's still unclear, at least to me, why this random draw works much, much better than the sequence. Is it because you don't get trapped in cycles? I don't know. But there's really this power of random draw that makes things incredibly fast. I mean, it's n times as fast. Difference is insane. Okay? And so you get linear convergence rate, and in practice, it actually destroyed all the other algorithms that we compared it to. So we have two versions, side with a constant step size, and we actually can do a line search in this particular case. And So Pegasus is basically stochastic gradient. That's full gradient, and that's LB of GS in green. So LB of GS tends to be an extremely well-performing method for this regression, and we just were so much faster. So since then, there are methods that have appeared that were either faster or simpler to use. Test error. SDC appeared roughly at the same time. SDRG does not have a memory requirement, but you pay a constant cost of something like 3. Saga is basically a clean version of what SAG was, and there was also a MISO. So now, this whole literature on what's now called stochastic gradient reduction methods, where really the one trick is just don't discard the gradient after you've computed them, keep them away. Any question? Yes?
So you keep the previous value, basically.
Yes.
Is it possible to somehow use the information from other updates to update that value? Maybe keep the trend of change of y's?
So Emilio Sood is about 5 slides ahead. That's exactly what we're going to do. That's a very good point. And it took us about 4 years more than you to realize that we could do that.
Because I'm coming from the future.
Yes. So there's something that we need to see. That's the actual reduction in error at every step. Okay. It's, of course, you want this to be as small as possible, so as close to 0 as possible. It's 1 minus the minimum of the inverse condition number and 1/8 times the number of data points. That's what appears in the analysis. It turns out that's really close to what we observe in practice. Okay. And there's something really interesting, which is that when do you make a low improvement? You make a small improvement when n is huge. When you have many, many data points, this is close to 0, and so you're not going to make many improvements. Unless your problem is fully conditioned. So if mu over L is already tiny, then you start to be roughly independent of the number of data points. Okay? If the minimum of these two is achieved for mu over L, then no matter what value of n I have, that's still going to be the minimum. So I'm going to achieve the same rates regardless of how many data points I have. And so what that tells you is that your improvement is bad when either you have to do many, many steps before viewing the same gradient again, so then when you store gradient, it starts to be really stale, or when except when your condition number is bad, because when your condition number is bad, you move so little in between 2 steps that it doesn't matter that you see many, many data points, because you're not going to have moved that much. So really what matters is how much you move in between 2 times you see the same data points. And that's bad when you moved a lot, and there are 2 cases when you moved a lot. When you have many data points you can see in between, or when your problem is well conditioned and you're going to make large moves in between. So staleness, despite the quality of this method, is clearly an issue. And the fact that your gradients have been computed to points which are far away hurts your convergence. And so somehow we could reduce that staleness, we would get faster convergence. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to do what Nicolas Le Roux proposed, which is instead of replacing, so right now we mindlessly replace the gradient at the current point with the stored gradient. Can we have a better approximation of the gradient at the current point than the stored gradient? And again, we're going to use the Hessian for that. So what we'll do is we're going to say what we use as a substitute for the gradient at the current point, it's not the stored gradient, it's the stored gradient plus the Hessian times how much we moved since then. And if my function is truly quadratic, that's perfect. If my function is not truly quadratic, that should still be good enough. And so now the error I'm making does not depend only on how much I moved, it depends on basically the third derivative of my function. If my Hessian is roughly constant, I'm going to have much less staleness. Everything else being equal. Okay? So it turns out that it works really well. So that's SVRG, which is another light side method in blue. And that's when you use the Hessian. Now, what you see is that on the x-axis here, you have the number of iterations you made and not the time. And it turns out that, as usual, whenever you model the Hessian, you pay the price in time. And so when we put the time, we actually do much, much worse than S0. So, as expected, modeling the Hessian is difficult. And so we actually had to use a method that Rob is an expert in, which called sketch and protect, to find approximations to the Hessian. It's basically saying I want to find some action group, which is a bunch of vectors, and I want to find a matrix which does like the Hessian on these vectors. And if I can have a small matrix that does the same, then I'm going to assume it behaves roughly the same. I can compute much easier. I'm not going to go into the details because there's one other thing I'd like to mention before the end of the talk. But it turns out that on some experiments it works. We do much, much better than SVRG, which is in blue. On some other experiments it works, but maybe not as much. And on some experiments it doesn't work at all. But really there's something not proper here, is that we have to do an approximation of the Hessian. And here that's for linear, generalized linear models, but if we were to extend this to deep nets, modeling the Hessian would be impossible. So I think we should be, for this method to be really used, we should be able to do the same without having to explicitly model the Hessian. Okay. Are there any questions before I move back to the online case with current work? So I'm going to increase the hand weightiness level again. Yes.
So when you take the average, when you do normalization, that kind of reduces the variance, the serial variance when you're.
Yes. So SAG, yes, it's a variance reduction technique.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because then that's what I'm going to present here. If you only rely on one gradient to estimate your true gradients, you're going to have a lot of variance. If you can somehow cluster many, many gradients, then the weight of your new gradients can be reduced because you also use some other information. And so suddenly you reduce your variance.
When you replace them randomly, you also reduce the variance rather than replacing them serially.
Why?
So because there might be serial correlation between the
So that might be the reason why. The thing is, we observed worse performance on every single data set where we tried the sequential order.
Yeah.
So
you randomize it, you reduce the variance in a sense. You cut
It might be the case, but my intuition would have been that on some data set, like the worst case would have been worse with sequential, but on some data set it should still have worked okay. And it turns out it's never worse than that, and it's still improved. So all these methods I talk about, SAG, SAGA, SVRG, they only work when you have a finite number of data points. And so I'd like to go back to the online case. Can we extend this to the online case? Momentum. Everyone knows momentum. It's a wonderful method. Every single paper that talks about momentum as a reconditioning technique. You go from the condition number to the square root of the condition number. That's phenomenal. In the batch case, you want to use momentum. And to go back to the question of the Hessian, you don't need to make a diagonal approximation because momentum is rotation invariant, which also is simple. But when you look at this, it has an averaging effect. I mean, you use fast gradients. So it feels like you want to use momentum for variance reduction. So why does no one use momentum for variance reduction? Okay? And there's actually a paper this year, and Sham was a co-author, that says that actually momentum does not work to do variance reduction. But all of these papers have something in common, is that they use a constant momentum. And I believe that's the crux of the issue. You do not want to use a constant momentum. Why? That's a simple computation, but I will show you. So you know momentum has a velocity. I'm sorry, I'm going quickly on momentum. The momentum has a velocity parameter. Okay? And at every time step, the update is not the last gradient, it's your velocity, which is a weighted average of all your past gradients. On the first step, my velocity parameter is my first stochastic gradient. And here, I'm assuming a quadratic with some noise. So my stochastic gradient is the true gradient plus some noise epsilon 0. Now I compute my new velocity vector, and I make my new move. And so that's the point I end up after 2 steps. And there's something weird that happens, is that the noise of the first gradient is counted twice. the point of the noise of the first gradient first appears in where I end up after one update. Because of course, where I end up after one update depends on my noise. But then I reuse my first gradient in my velocity. So I end up paying the same noise again. So momentum has a compounding effect on the noise, which is you keep reusing the same noise over and over again, and you actually amplify the noise of the data points. Okay? And this was when you use, so I'm going to show you the difference between, that's when you use a constant momentum with different values of momentum, 0, 0.99, 0.999, 0.9999, which are common values. That's the performance when you use increasing momentum. And here to me is the reason why. And I'll probably end up on that graph. Actually, I can do a bit more. Here's what I did is, I computed a few updates from 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 updates. And now I say, what I end up after that number of updates will depend on the specific noise of the gradients I summed. Okay? I'm assuming some gradient. What is the importance of each individual noise into what I end up? What is the importance of the noise of the first gradient, on the noise of the second gradient, on the noise of the third gradient, up until the last gradient? Okay? As I said, each noisy gradient has an influence on where I end up. Not only at the first step because I use my gradients, but in all the subsequent velocities and all the subsequent steps. And if you want to reduce the total variance of your updates, you'd like each of these nodes to have roughly an equal weight into where you end up. So you want this line to be as flat as possible. You don't want one noise to be dominating. You don't want where you end up after 1,000 steps. You don't want where you end up to only depend on the noise of the first example, or only depend on the noise of the last example. Because since these are ID noise, if you depend on all these noise nicely, then your total variance goes down. Yes?
Can you repeat what's the x-axis?
Yes, the x-axis is the index of the gradient. So here you have what is the influence of the noise of the first gradient as sampled. Here, that's what is the influence of the noise of the last gradient as sampled. So if you go back here, what you end up after two steps, theta 2 and the theta star, depends both on epsilon 0, the noise on the first gradient, and epsilon 1, the noise of the second gradient. And if I keep updating, I'm going to have epsilon 0, epsilon 1, epsilon 2, epsilon 3, up to epsilon 1,000. And each of these epsilons are going to have a different weight. And each of these will participate in the total variance of yn. And I want this total variance to be as small as possible. And this total variance is as small as possible if every epsilon has the exact same weight in the update. And you see something weird appearing, which is that when you use like the smallest momentum of all the ones, let's forget 0, 0.9, the first example has a disproportionate impact early on, but then actually the last example has a disproportionate impact. So depending on how many updates you've done, you don't get the same behavior. And if you say, well, since I'd like to, I don't want my last example, because the larger your momentum, the larger the weight of the history. Okay? So the smaller the influence of your last update. So if you say, oh, at 0.9, my last update has too much influence, I want to use the larger momentum to reduce the influence of my last weight, so I'm going to use 0.99, that's slightly better, but then early on, that's going to be higher. Yes?
So, okay, what is the 4 graphs? They should be
Sorry, that's after 10 updates, 100 updates, 1,000 updates, 10,000 updates. So you see that the behavior of each value for the momentum is really not the same, depending on how many iterations you do in your optimization algorithm. And just like we say, when you look at the convergence proof for stochastic optimization, you see that if you know the number of steps in advance, you can achieve the lower bound with a constant step size. And the decreasing step size is only when you don't know the number of steps in advance. Here, that's exactly the same thing. If you tell me how many steps you're going to do in the optimization, I can tell you which momentum value you should choose. But if I don't know what you're going to do, you should use an increasing momentum. And you see increasing momentum is actually the yellow curve. So the yellow curve here is flat. It's exactly what you want. It's still flat. It's still flat after 10,000 iterations, it's not flat, but it's the flatter of all. So that's the one that gives you the lowest variance. Yes?
Is there any significance to where the peak happens for the ones that have constant?
I don't know yet. It turns out that the math tells you that for some reason when you 0.99, it's this point that has the most influence. These curves are pretty much from late last week. So there's still many things I don't understand. Okay, just one last thing. When you increase the momentum, at some point it seems to help. But I talked about the staleness of the gradients. The larger the momentum, the more you're going to use old gradients. And so at some point they're going to become too stale. And just like before, when I added the Hessian times the displacement to make them less stale, can you do the same without explicitly modeling the Hessian? That's again super new. It looks like you can. That's the blue curve. That's when you use pure momentum. And here, that's what I call when you do gradient transport to try to reduce the staleness by applying Hessian times the displacement without ever explicitly modeling the Hessian. And you see that we achieve much lower error for the same value of momentum. I'm going to stop here because I see there's a few questions. So the conclusion is really, I think variance reduction is understudied in the online case. In the finite case, with stochastic variance reduction methods, we now have a good grasp of what to do. All of this was very hand-wavy. Now I'd like to see, can we build a formal proof, let's say, of increasing momentum in the online case? Can we show that it actively leads to converging algorithm, let's say, for constant step size? And can we come up with a practical rule for how to choose the hyperparameters so that we can make a practical algorithm? Thank you.
So what was the schedule you used for the increasing momentum?
Yes, very good. It's t divided by t plus k. I'm sorry, I should not use k. T divided by t plus some constant, where t is a step number. So it starts at 0, it goes to 1. And here the constant was actually 10,000. And the constant actually has a large impact of what the curves look like. I picked a constant so that it looks nice. And that's clearly something that, for right now, I have no understanding what should that constant be.
So is it strictly increasing momentum or it's like an adaptive momentum?
Here, I went for strictly increasing. I believe in simplicity. My gut feeling is that we should be able to do well with the increasing momentum. I know there's been some study around adaptive momentum, in which case proving anything seems extremely complicated. So I'd like to have something right now for increasing momentum. And all of these adaptive schemes, especially for momentum, and what we saw here is we try to optimize the momentum at every time step to minimize the variance. But what you see is that the momentum parameter at one time step has a very long-lasting influence. And so, because it influences everything you do afterwards. And so it's extremely complicated to optimize the momentum. So I'd rather go for a fixed scheme for now.
One more question. So I just wonder, what's your grudge with iterate averaging?
Yes.
So what I'm trying to say is that it's not only uniform iterate averaging. So tail averaging is known to help, and that seems to achieve like a similar effect.
Yes. My worry, that's this one, is let's assume you have a mountain, and you go around that mountain, and then you average all the iterates. You're going to on the mountain.
Yeah, that's obviously wrong.
But you don't see this from every single iterate. So with here, when you do gradient averaging, if your gradient loss is bad, you're going to draw new gradients to correct for that. But it seems to me that iterate averaging, you can have a path of very low losses, but the average is going to be a high loss, and I don't know how you would detect it.
Well, so what I'm saying is that so you can just average the tail, right? So just the last few, and then you can cross-validate this and to the same amount as this increasing momentum.
You're right.
This impression.
No, I said it might be just personal bias. I don't know if many people or if anyone uses iterate averaging in like deep nets, but I'd be interested in knowing like how well it performs. I know Yann Lequin, like 15 years ago, was doing something along these lines, but right now most people use elastic. And I know Francis and one of the students, maybe Emmerich, have something that's prediction averaging. It was released on archive 2 days ago.
Thanks so much.